How did he give me HIV? Part 7. So, somebody messaged me and said, girl, I know you ain't finna leave me on that cliffhanger. So, since I had to get up and do something, I guess I'll go ahead and give you guys part 7. So, yeah, when we got in the car, first thing he said to me was, don't tell anybody. And that was like confirmation for me. So, you know how I always tell people, you know how when you're watching, like, back in the day, you know, for those of you who are 35 and up, maybe 30, you know, back in the day, we used to have to watch VCRs on VCR tape, movies on VCRs. And so, you know how when you rewind it while you're watching it, and it's like, blah, 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 that is literally what happened in my mind. In that moment, even though, you know, I picked up the red flag of his mom telling me to ask about that and everything, and I did. I literally just told you guys what I asked him and what his response was. And I'm just, in my head, I'm like, wait a minute, okay. But then now I'm thinking, like, how? We went and got tested. I told him I was negative. He told me he was negative in front of the doctor. Like, how? Like, that's all I could just keep saying was how. But I kept putting the pieces of the puzzle together in my head because, again, I already knew I was negative. I knew I was negative December 2006 when I was in the hospital. I knew I was negative when we got tested that summer before we got married. So I'm just like, what in the world? So, again, we're sitting in this car, and he's told me this, and I didn't say anything. Like, literally. My mom was there for Thanksgiving visiting. I didn't say anything. And, I mean, that's what it was. I didn't say anything for a couple weeks. It took me a couple weeks before I think it really, like, hit me to the point where I'm driving to work, third shift, it's raining, and I just call my mom crying, like hysterically crying. She's thinking something's wrong, and I'm like, you know, just, I couldn't get my words out. And so finally, once I was able to get to the job, get in the parking lot, oh, excuse me, y'all, get to the parking lot, and I tell her, the doctor told me that I was HIV positive. And she just started crying, and she's just like we both were still at, I was definitely still at this point of like, how or why, like what? And so, of course, through like maybe that next week or so, you know, we're talking to my dad, let him know, my brother, my oldest daughter's godmother, we talked to her, and, you know, because these were people that were going to bring me comfort and me knowing that they knew, so that if I needed someone to call, I knew I had these people I could call, you know. And so the question then became, what are you going to do? Because remember, we had just got married. Like, we're still newlyweds. I'm newly pregnant. When I say newly pregnant, I had not even had my first ultrasound yet. Like, that new. So newly pregnant, all of this stuff, and it was just like, what are you gonna do? So for the whole month of December, I said, you know what? I'm just gonna come to Jacksonville for a couple weeks. You know, his sister at the time, and I believe she still does, live in New York. And so we had already got her a plane ticket to come visit us because she wanted to come for Christmas and visit her brother and us for Christmas. And so I say, well, you know, at some point I was going to be back before she left. Her flight left like, I think 2 or 3 days after Christmas. So I stayed in Jacksonville pretty much the whole December. Because honestly, I didn't know how to deal with him. I didn't know how to be around him. Being around him, I felt disgusted. I felt really, really disgusted because here is someone who I trusted, someone who I thought was my best friend, someone who I thought I knew everything about. Keyword, knew everything about, okay? And I didn't. And he kept calling my phone. When you coming home? Because I never gave a date. I never said when I was coming home. So he kept calling me. When are you coming home? What do you think? Like, he's trying to figure out where my head is at. What am I thinking? You know, and so I went ahead and I told my parents, I said, you know what? I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back. And I did. I went back 2 days after Christmas, so December 27th, 2007, I went back. And when I went back with really only one thing on my mind, and that was to basically figure out how to leave. I hadn't discussed it with him because one of the things I knew about him, just know, as long as I knew him, I knew that if I told him that I didn't want to stay with him, I didn't want to stay married, that he was going to say or do whatever he needed to do to try to get me to stay. And, you know, during that time, being naive, I probably would have. I probably would have, you know, stayed if I would have allowed him to know and have the conversation with me about staying. And so I never told him any plans or any thoughts that I was having. Now, one thing I can tell you is I was the homemaker of the house. So while I was gone, he wasn't really going grocery shopping. There wasn't no food in the house, none of that. So when I got back, I'm pregnant. I need to eat. All this stuff. So I told him, I was like, look, we got to get groceries. There's no food in here. So we get in the car, and I'm driving. He's in the passenger seat. We get in the car, and we go to the store. Now, one thing I can say, you know, I don't know if you guys can tell by now that I do have a little sense of humor. Not always serious all the time. And so sometimes when I'm driving, I see some of the weirder stuff. Like, I'm that one that's going to catch you walking down the sidewalk, tripping over your feet. Like, I'm the one that's going to catch you walking into that wall that you thought nobody saw you walking to. That's me. And so we're in the car, I'm driving, he's in the passenger seat, and I just burst out laughing, y'all. I just started laughing, and he's looking around. What's so funny? Like, he was like, what you saw? What's so funny? And I was like, oh, I just thought of a new way to you today. Yeah, that's where my head was at. My head was there. I was to that point. I was to the point of rage. I tell people all the time, I literally, once I got back and I was faced with him again, I went through every single emotion that you can think of. I went through sadness, depression. I went through thinking about a moment, you know, I probably thought of a happy moment, and then I say, well, he done messed that happy moment up, and I got into a moment of rage. I got to the point of rage where that's what I thought. Every time I looked at him, I thought of a new way to do it. I did. I really did. And I knew at that point it was time for me to go. It was time. It was time for me to go. It was time for me to get all my stuff, pack it up, and go. So again, I didn't tell him that's what I was going to do. From that moment on, he didn't sleep in the room no more. Because, I mean, we were still sleeping in the same bed. But when he realized that's where my headspace was at, he was sleeping on the couch. I got up to go in the kitchen to get water in the middle of the night. He looking to see, oh, shoot, what is she doing? Like, he was paranoid at that point. So, yeah, I knew it was time to go. Because I would ask him questions. I would ask him, like, things that I want to know. Like, because by this point, I believe he already knows that he knows I know, like, dude, you already had this and you didn't say nothing. So I'm asking him questions like, where you get it from? Why you didn't tell me? Why you kept this? Like, I'm asking him these questions, and for the life of me, I don't understand why he would not tell me anything.